Okay, we are now live. Good evening, guys. Welcome to Knights of the Round Table. It will be a monthly discussion panel. It's a collaboration between QuidditchUK and Quidditch Post, and each month we'll be tackling a different issue that we see in our community. And this evening we're going to be talking about gender equality in Quidditch, overcoming gender stereotypes. We can just see Will. Okay, so I'm Abby. I will be your host this evening. I'm a volunteer with the Quidditch Post. You might also know me as the captain of the Chimeras. And my lovely guests are going to introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So we start with Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I play for Durham. I captain Durham, in fact. And I play for Team UK as well. And yeah, I also volunteer with QuidditchUK and Quidditch Post. I don't know if that's relevant, but...
Cool, Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Edland. I am captain of the Nottingham Nightmares. I do Team UK. I don't volunteer because I'm not that organised. But
Hi, I'm Will Johnson. I play for Taxis and I previously played for Bangor, and I seem to be the only person here who is not a captain. I was invited through application to take part in this discussion, specifically because I'm a gender flux player, even though a gender flux individual, but I play as male.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to start with some directed discussion. So we're just going to set the scene of gender in the UK Quidditch scene at the minute, and then we're going to go on to some discussion points that we had submitted by the community. So just to begin with, I'd like us to discuss what stereotypes exist specifically of female players, and then we'll move on to issues surrounding trans and non-binary players, and where we think that has an impact on pitch. Okay, so who would like to offer their thoughts on which stereotypes specifically affect female players?
I'll go with a starter. We've all played before and you have the gender rule, but there's the stereotype that, or more the expectation, I would say, that generally you don't have more than 3-3, or whatever, but generally no more than 3 female players on pitch at a time, that there's a specific expectation that having a female majority isn't something you see very often, and especially going on to female captains and things. And so that is something I notice a lot, and it's a big impact on the game.
Yeah, what do you think, Jackie?
I guess I'd go with the classic, as a female chaser, waiting around the hoops, because that's always great fun. I feel like definitely this season I've found it lessening, but there are teams where you watch them play and I'm just like begging their female player, I'm like, don't let yourself be cordoned into this position, and I think there definitely is still an aspect of that to be overcome. Because let's be honest, standing by the hoops is not great fun as a distraction.
Especially if you don't get past you, it's like, wow.
But I mean, that's obviously a really obvious one to point out, but quite a major one.
Oh,
Yeah.
you have the same with beating, that the female beater is the weaker back defensive one. It's something we see a lot, and is kind of not true, but still prevalent.
Yeah.
I'd say that there's a perception that female players can't take command of pitch as well, or feel less confident doing so. Again, I think that kind of stems back to the difference between how women and men are treated earlier. Like, if a woman takes command, she's bossy, while if a man does it, he's empowered or whatever. It's bullshit. But I think it stems from that. And I think I don't know if people are comfortable, taking that command. I'd say 2-3 female captains.
No, but it's true, and it happens. And occasionally, the most embarrassing, it happened to me earlier in the year, that someone with a strong, commanding male voice, and you just automatically are conditioned to go along with that, and you have to stop and be like, that's bollocks. What was I doing? Why were we doing that? But depressing, and it happens, and I totally agree that women are not as encouraged to take that kind of role, and I think that's a big part of why fewer girls go for keeping, is because they're expected to dictate the play and to be that command when they're on pitch, and so girls don't feel as confident doing that. Even, or Jackie, you saying like holding the ball, like trying to encourage female players to drive.
Yeah.
To what extent do people, so we've partially assigned this to sort of sociological expectations of women in terms of command. To what extent, because some people would say, especially maybe in the US, that it's all to do with physiology. It's like, oh, well, men are keepers because they're taller and men are drivers because they're stronger. To what extent do you feel that's substantiated, and to what extent do you feel that's not?
I think it's bollocks. I think, right,
Thanks.
so I'm done. That's my no. So I'm a disabled player, so I have other limitations, and everyone has different limitations, and gender may be a limitation. Like the way that estrogen reacts with muscle development compared to testosterone are different, but it's the same. Like everyone has different aspects which they excel in. Like some people are born with a genetic well, the word that I'm going to fail to say repeatedly. I can't, no, not going to try. But you know what I mean, they have a genetic deviancy or tendency to a certain trait. But if they don't work at it, they're still not going to develop and do it. Andrew Hull is a fantastic keeper, and people just assume that it's because he's gifted, which is rubbish. Andrew played badminton for county between the ages of like 14 and 16. That's why he bats it out of the air like he's got no problem. It's because he trained and developed that skill, and it transfers into Quidditch. And I think, like, everyone has these limitations. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'm saying the same thing again. But I'll cut myself off.
Well, I think like Will's pretty much covered what I would have said there. Like, there definitely is a basis in the whole, building muscle, and particularly like where you build muscle, like building upper body strength. Oh my God, is it a thing? But you can't place an expectation on someone because of their gender. Like, you don't know. You could have a team of guys who don't work out at home and don't put any commitment into training. Like, you can't just place an expectation on someone because of how they look.
And it's the same is true for the guys as well. Like,
oh, completely.
Like who am I thinking? JT is not the biggest guy on our team, but is really good. More to do with things like agility, which can be a girl can be very agile and like avoid the people and put it through the hoop. But yeah, there's this expectation that somehow to be a driver, you've got to have a certain build and be able to push through and maybe be male.
Excellent. So we have 3 captains here, and Will, you've got a lot of experience with coaching. So to what extent can coaches help players, especially new players who do have these assumptions, overcome these stereotypes? So in the context of training, not necessarily in tournaments, how do you encourage people that would traditionally be considered as good options for drivers to do so, or do you struggle with that?
So I was literally doing this today. We've been training in Reading today, and we did driving drills. And Taxes is a bit of an anomaly team, as in everyone has experience, and the players who are there are quite well developed. And I think we may have been the only team in the UK to have played a fully assigned female at birth lineup in a competitive game.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure you'd expect it from a Team McLaughlin setup. It's about taking people aside and looking at how they can develop as an individual within the wider scope of it. So if a player is tripping up on the same issue every time they run a drill, and it's because they're not experienced, or they're looking at the player in front of them who might be a male body player, it's true for any training tactic actually, it's not specific to this, but they're seeing them do a certain tactic which works and trying to mirror it, and it doesn't work because of limitations of their build. It's trying to take them to one side and say, actually, do this, because so-and-so hasn't got a good reach, so you can get around them. And they're going to be expecting you to go through. So if you do a little dummy, like, again, I'm getting too specific and rambly, but it's doing it like trying to make it more tailored.
Yeah.
You get different solutions to the same problem, effectively.
I would totally agree that, or at least I notice more with female players that, you know, you can see when a girl has come from a netball background or something, and so they're not as comfortable running with the ball. They're definitely not feeling it with the contact, whereas, you know, you have guys who are coming from rugby. But if you can watch, like you saying with Andrew Hull and badminton, if you can see, like, actually, yeah, what is their background, and okay, understand where they're coming from more, and then that can be a way into sort of working out, do we have to start with like the baby steps of contact and like just being afraid of falling over and any of that kind of thing, not even happy sort of, like, because in netball you're not even meant to shove each other very hard, meant to, but so it's those, I'd say, those building blocks of dealing with these stereotypes. It's like understanding somebody's background and easing them into it, yeah, in a way that's more helpful for them rather than a generalized approach.
And I think also on a coaching basis, like very similar to what Will was saying, individual feedback. So you see people like freshers coming in and they have all this confidence to like make these big hits and this sort of thing, and then it might not work out for them. And I think confidence is maybe one of the number one things that it all comes back to. So if you can take someone who has maybe been like put down a bit because they've tried to get past these two people, or they've tried to make this big tackle and it's consistently not working, and just like renew that confidence that it's like okay to give it another go, because otherwise they go away, they think, oh, I can't do that, what can I do? Oh, well, I've seen all these people, you know, I say again, stood by the hoops. So I think, and then they go and do that. So I think instilling confidence into people on an individual basis and having that ability just to talk to people and figure out how they want to play, and then, as Will said, adapt play style to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I was going to flip back to like the netball versus rugby kind of style of play, and it is from 13 years old. Like, boys at school are conditioned to run the fuck through people, and girls are conditioned to, again, this is doing a direct comparison. It's not going to be the same experiences for everyone, these are generalizations. But, like, the skills, those skills are just as valuable as, like, brute force and idiocy. The amount of times I've been concussed, like, like I don't do it, oh, maybe I do it after yesterday, but, like, it's not a skill-based thing, and Quidditch is such a diverse sport. Like, tackling isn't the end of the game, because beating is such an integrated aspect. It's half the thing, but but do you know what I mean? So like, if your team can't tackle very well, if they are more slightly built, regardless of gender, if your beating game is excellent, then why bother tackling? It's painful and difficult, and you probably get landed on. Right.
Because I think that's actually a really important equalising factor that people don't necessarily take into account. So people are like, oh, you know, it's a full contact sport, and you know, just it's always, oh, with this small girl and this massive guy, and they always have these really specific qualifiers. But when you take into account beating, especially, yes, obviously it's contact, and all the best beaters can tackle, but
Hello?
Have we lost Abby?
I think we might.
Without a captain.
Oh, Abby, you're back.
oh,
You went away.
oh. Okay. I don't know where I was.
All the best beaters can tackle.
Right. Okay. Yeah, all the best beaters can tackle, but that you can't ignore the fact that beating does just completely negate the contact aspect of it. So you can stop anyone regardless of muscle mass or regardless of size or speed, and all these buzzwords that get thrown around when physiology and gender comes up in this conversation. So you can't, I think it is quite, you're missing out this huge element of the sport if you just say, oh, well, you know, it's a full contact sport and the big people are just going to win, sorry. So I think that is quite important to take into account.
Can I just say as well that there's kind of a flip side to it too, that if you can help girls to do the thing that they're not expected to do, and vice versa, but it's more noticeable, I'd say, with girls, that can be a real like advantage if you have a small girl who actually can take down that person, but that person is assuming they can't. Then you're just like, oh my goodness, they fell over, we have the ball, and like it can. The flip side is when you get it, it can be really, really useful. Like lots of when I play with Matt Blint, I especially notice just like a couple of years ago when the defensive female backbeater was more of a prevalent thing, that when we were doing stuff, people would always go for Matt, despite him not being that much bigger than me. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm not scared of contact. I do martial arts. Like, I don't mind it, but Matt can deal with it, and I'll just run and do nothing. Yeah. And he was like, I don't know why people go for, like, it's silly that they go for me, but it's a mistake because you're so much happier because of it. We're so much happier. So it can, small advantages.
You have the element of surprise. Okay, so since we're looking at the coaching side of things, how do people go about recruiting players of all genders? Because this does come up over and over again, especially when you get a team being like, oh, we don't have enough women, it's really sad, so, we should be able to play with one down or whatever. And what always comes up is recruit more women. And I've definitely said that to people. But what do you think are the practical problems of that, and how would you go about appealing to players of all genders?
I would say that, or at least I wonder if it's the same for you, Jackie, as well. And you as well, Abby. But just like, that being a female captain definitely, like, at the Freshers' Fair affects it both ways. That when you're trying to convince a guy that it's a serious sport, they're a bit like, but you're 5'3" of like girly looking shizzle. But on the other hand, you can tell girls that it's going to be okay and they really believe you as a sort of like, contact is fine, we will ease you in, I can do it, you can do it. So I'd say that we have the advantage of me being a girl, but equally I'm sure that it's the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, like, basically repeating what you've just said, but it sounds ridiculous, but at Freshers' Fair we would very much divide up between us who we were going to go for. Like, if we saw a big group of rugby lads wandering around, we'd be like, Robbie, hit that up. Like, all right, mate, all right. And sort of, it's playing up the stereotypes completely, but you do have to do that to initially catch people's attention. And I think, and the same with you say with us, or female players talking to other female prospective players about the sport. And I think, like, one minor thing, if you have the capability to do it, is just set up a screen and have footage running on that screen. Because if they can see other people doing it, it suddenly becomes that much more accessible.
But that's when the Southwest Fantasy Highlights video has to be used specifically, because it scares some of the girls, because it's like fast and action, and there are lots of clips of girls taking tackles, and so we've done that before and been sort of like, we're just gonna pause it, close the laptop, and then open it again.
I mean, there was a sister video to that, the Women to Watch Out For, which is quite good. Because a lot of them are just slaying and it's great. And there's even a female seeker in it, which really pleases me. She doesn't catch it, which is a bit slashing, but it is really good. And I think definitely having that media accessible, not just being like, oh, go watch this video, but actually having it right in front of them, being like, look at these women doing these fantastic things, really does help. It really does make a huge difference. But like you said, Jackie, you definitely have to, I mean, it's ultimately Freshers' Fair is basically marketing, and you do have to try to target your audience. So if you've got, like you said, if you've got a big bunch of rugby lads coming up, it's got to be like, okay, you go deal with them because they're not going to take me seriously.
Yeah, which is a sad truth. But,
it's unfortunate, but it is
a thing, and you just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I think the Harry Potter element, although lots of people are like, we're not Harry Potter orientated, that is an appeal for some people who aren't necessarily athletic previously. It could be either gender, and kind of it's their first introduction into athleticism. So I know in Bangor, one person only applied to Bangor University because she wanted to play Quidditch.
We've had that.
Yeah. Again, like taxes, anonymous team where our recruitment is very different. We're getting people who've got experience and are graduating and are all over the place, and our gender balance is pretty much perfect. I think we played with a BQC. We can't break gender rule unless people play out of position.
I've been carded for that. It's so annoying. Damn you.
Like, I think it's impossible because of the amount of non-binary and just the balances of things. I think because keeping and yeah, so I think we worked it out that we'd have to play like Eamon, oh, I can't remember his name now. Eamon.
Harrison.
Yes, thank you. As a keeper, and then just like, move everyone around like a position to butcher it. Again, you were saying about like women captains and women in leadership roles. I think that is important. Obviously, Bangor was set up by Emily Alterbridge and captained by Anna Barton last year, who are both pretty formidable. And those two in contact go together. Like, I mean, got a number of bruises to prove both of those two can tackle. I don't know. It's such a broad question how to appeal to women.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of like, I don't know, there's no answer, is there? Because there's so many different aspects of it. And if people are afraid of contact, they're going to be afraid of contact. Again, that's non-gender specific.
Yeah.
Partnerships with rugby clubs is maybe something to look at.
Right, sorry?
Because the tackling in Quidditch is way more varied than in rugby. Then maybe trying to setting up a partnership with their university's rugby club. Again, Emily Alterbridge, of course, last year started playing for Bangor University Women's Rugby Club, and they were all astounded by Emily's tackling. I think we all are a little bit, but like that, I don't know whether that fed into Quidditch back again, as in whether they did a reverse thing or not. But having that kind of, I don't know, partnership almost to develop skills independent of members might also increase membership. I know Sophie McKenzie, the Bees captain, rugby background, an absolutely phenomenal player. At Christmas Cup, she managed to stop a player with her chin. It was not a good idea. Don't do it if you can choose to, but like just ridiculously good. Like, again, independent of gender.
I think so much of it comes down to that background, and that people don't appreciate that enough sometimes when talking about girls versus guys and the gender thing. And I'm like, you really have to remember that this girl has done netball since the age of 7, and it's whereas our fantastic female rugby player broke herself, so we're grumpy. But I know, God, I've taken her flat. She broke herself and then tried again and broke herself again. It's like you can have some amazing female tacklers. It's just like teaching and getting them confident, and like, you can do it.
Thing is, Will, you were talking about gender role, and I think that leads on to a really interesting polemic that we see come up quite a lot, and I think you might have some interesting thoughts with it. So, where do people stand on fielding 5 or 6, even 6, AMAB players, and to what extent is this problematic? Discuss.
It's a tricky one, because as a captain, that is exactly the lineup I put on pitch. And I would like to think that is because those are, the best players, and that is what the best lineup is. Whether or not this is some ingrained societal thing that I am just completely unaware of, I don't know. But, it's very difficult to separate that from trying to think of players objectively, irrespective of their gender. Like, that is realistically what you should base your lineup on. Who works well together, what sort of styles are they playing, and how is that going to fit in? It's tricky. Like, it's definitely tricky. Like, some of the best Quidditch I have played is when I'm on pitch with another female chaser. It's so much fun, but I feel like an absolute hypocrite saying, "Oh no, you have to play 3-3 because that's not what I put on pitch." So it's really, it's tricky.
That is why I asked it. Sorry, Lucy, if you want to say.
No, we'll go crazy.
I was going to say, you said you got played as male. Mm-hmm. So where does that come from, and how do you feel that integrates into your squad and into sort of wider perspectives?
So my opinions of this are kind of based canonologically through the story of Quidditch. That like the gender rule got implemented and introduced specifically to prevent teams from playing an all-male lineup. That's where it came from. That was the purpose of that rule. That's why that rule exists. And then as the sport developed and more non-binary people became kind of well, I'm sure they were in it already, but they raised this issue, and the rules developed, and it became as the gender that you identify as. But my, do I say problem? This is my opinion of this rule, is that the kind of the principle behind the rule being implemented in the first place still stands. We should still have female body players on pitch, regardless of how they identify. And kind of, I very much came to understand my own gender flux through the conversations held within the sphere of Quidditch. But my ability as an athlete has not changed at all. Like, it also depends on how I'm expressing my gender, but like to simplify it, if I'm feeling extremely masculine on a Tuesday, that doesn't mean I'll play any better than if I feel extremely feminine on a Thursday. And to me, that's the crux of it. Again, it's about expression. So if I use male pronouns, but if I didn't, I'd still implement. I would say use they, but I would play as male, because the reason that rule exists, the reason it's kind of, I don't say in the Constitution, because that sounds a bit dramatic. It's not a Constitution, it's the rules. But like, it's to ensure inclusivity. And I'm getting rambly, I'm saying the same thing again. But like, that's the crux of it for me. And maybe as my opinions develop over the next year, especially playing for taxes, because I mean, like, there's no risk of the rule being abused there. Like, just in terms of ensuring female inclusivity, like again, it's anonymous. So that's why it's kind of important to me to play as male.
Okay, I think that's really valuable insight, thanks. So if there's one of the questions submitted by the community was, does the gender rule have loopholes? And I think obviously this comes up over and over again in terms of, but then they can play 6 male players, and I think it would be really interesting to examine the problems with that perspective. So what do you think?
Well, I have so much stress with that, like Jackie's saying that it's really difficult. Like, that's where it comes, like the majority of the stress comes from, because I really dislike that attitude that something that Will has just described as really personal and irrelevant almost can be used to an advantage. But the thing that kind of the attitude that pisses me off slightly about it is I've come across the notion before that if you have a like female body being defined as gender neutral or something, that doesn't give an advantage opposed to a male body, which then you're like, more male bodies on pitch, and it's like that makes me really angry, because like it shouldn't matter, and I don't care if anyone on the team decides to change gender or whatever. Like, it's whatever they want to go with, but I'm aware that there is a certain, that's just something people can be aware of, and it gives certain advantages, which, as we've said, like having a load of people who can run in a straight line can be good, though sometimes not if, say, you actually want them to pass, and they never were good at the passing, they were good at the cut. Like, we lost Abby again.
Oh no,
she's still there.
I think we've lost
But there are certain advantages, in a way, if you get what I mean, that people can perceive it as advantageous. And got it. It makes me grumpy.
I think that's very true, and that is very much what's informed my decision to carry on playing as male. That I wouldn't want a situation where someone would see something, like you said, very personal, very like intimate aspect of who I am on a fundamental level, seen as advantageous. And like, again, playing with Emily Orterbridge, to name drop the same person every fucking 5 minutes.
Just that formidable.
Like, she can tackle Farmer. She gets concussed doing it, and has only done it once, but it was successful. I am yet to do that. But if you put the 3 of us in a lineup and said who can tackle who, the judgment call would arguably be the 6'2", 200-pound male body player. Not that I wouldn't be surprised if Orterbridge was like 200 pounds of like concrete. She eats more than me. It's ridiculous. Anyway, tangent again, sorry. But do you know what I mean? And an informed decision in terms of informed by societal preferences and bias says, get me to tackle the big player. But again, tactically, that's rubbish. I'm 6'2". My centre of gravity is like by my nose. Like it's a bad position to try and move someone. Unless I want to squat right down to the ground, it's rubbish. You want a small player who's strong and has a lower centre of gravity to move a big object, like on a physics level. Sorry, I'm saying that right.
Like going completely off tangent from the gender rule thing, but sort of leading on from what Will was saying. Like when you're choosing who to mark on defense, like if you have two players running down your side, and you have like this big like hulking male guy and this like tiny agile female chaser, your mind goes, oh, I'm marking this huge guy, but because he's the bigger threat. But that's so often proven wrong.
Yeah.
Just it is. I definitely had a period where I had to be like, no, like you have to assess them as equal threats because you just don't know what they can do. And more often than not, the one that if you leave this female player alone, she's going to be like dunking hoops everywhere.
I found something which people tend to do, internally or externally, verbally or non-verbally, is the fact that if something meets your expectation, if the big, strong male player who's 6'4" scores a goal, you're like, of course they score goals. And if
confirmation bias.
Yeah, and if a female does excellently, she's the exception.
Yeah.
Well, if you imagine if you kind of broke it down statistically, there wouldn't be that much difference. And when they've done studies on stuff like military training, they found that relatively people reach a similar level of ability. Not necessarily like it's relative. So like the 6 foot woman and the 6 foot man have a relative strength. And it might be that the guy can lift a few pounds more because of upper body strength and physiological differences. But in terms of actual ability, which sport's not developed enough for that to be a factor yet. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe if we get to the point where we have an Olympic squad, the gender rule needs to be revisited. But until that point, like, how many players are at an athletic capacity?
That's the thing.
If they were a different gender, they would be worse or better.
Exactly.
Maybe in the world, there's a handful, maybe a dozen.
Yeah, because people are like, oh, well, at that absolute top capacity, then a man's always going to be stronger. And it's like, how many Olympic athletes do you play? Like, I'm just asking.
At top capacity, I don't have a beer belly, so like we're way off that.
So, since you mentioned Olympics and sort of greater codification of the sport, one of our submissions from Phil Sam, thank you, Phil, was, could the gender rule still be enforced with wider public acceptance without calls for a split that's so embedded in our sports culture? So basically, if we say somehow the Olympic Committee was reviewing us, do you think that the gender rule would fly, or do you think it would be inevitable that there would have to be that gendered split?
If it was a foot race, I'd say yes, because then it's down to time. But when you actually look at sport, it's ability-based. There may be slight capacity differences, or whatever you want to call it, but I think even at the top tier, it's a matter of seconds, isn't it? And if both teams, or all the teams involved in the competition, held to the same standard, then there isn't there isn't. Do you know what I mean? There's no kind of reason for it to be implemented like that.
Because I have seen it mentioned in the US, people being like, oh, should we have split gender leagues? Like, I assume most of your knee-jerk reaction is going to be like, no. But what would you think of that? And why if you have a problem with that, why do you have a problem with that? If you do.
The mixed genderness is like the best bit, though. Like, it's so much fun. I love being able to hit Farmer with a bludger. There's so much of him to hit. It's the most satisfying thing. But just, like, it's something that you don't appreciate until you're like, oh my god, I'm playing with my male friends, doing the thing, and it's nice because I'm really not a fan of lad culture, and I don't really like the sort of, one of my friends, they sort of do a lot of their mixes with the American football, and it's a very sort of slightly laddie, very stereotypes. Like they all get along, but they come together and they bang and they go away, and it's just I kind of obviously like nice. Well, but I just it's something that I really appreciate, and even though it would probably be fun to just play with the girls, like some of the best bit is being able to build those friendships with guys that you don't actually have the same kind of opportunities to in a lot of other situations. And I like being able to boss around guys too. That's really fun. They have to listen.
That's really nice. I enjoy that.
Like in terms of the part of the question that asked about the wider public acceptance, I think that if it were, as you say, accepted by this Olympic Committee, that would normalise it in a lot of people's minds. Like, it would definitely be accepted that you could have a mixed gender league. And I think the only aspect of the gender rule that would probably cause public controversy would be like the non-binary aspect. Like that's the most likely part, but that's just because of general public. Not even not accepting it, just not having knowledge of it. So I think that would be the most controversial part if you're talking about public acceptance sides. I can't see that many people having an issue with the mixed gender thing. I just don't see it happening. I see if it were to become, that if it were to be Sports England and Olympic Committee and stuff, I just think that stamp of approval would almost normalise it in people's minds. They'd be like, oh, okay, and, get on with their lives.
Stop freaking out over a sport and move on.
Yeah, maybe I'm just being really naive, but when you get an acceptance from something that respected, that's almost massively beneficial to the sport in how it's perceived by the public. I don't know if I worded that very well. The words are not coming to me right now.
I think
okay, take a
depends
break.
on whether we want to go with like the Daily Mail's definition of the UK or like maybe the Independent's definition of the UK. Like, is everyone going to be massively bigoted, or are they going to be like, oh yeah, whatever, tell me more about Harry Potter? Like, arguably the more ridiculous part. But then, again, are people going to be like, oh, you can't have this, they're going to get injured? Just like, well, yeah, probably, but like, I get injured. Like,
but that doesn't seem to be rugby.
Yeah.
If you think back to like when you try and explain Quidditch to your families, which we all know is the most fun thing to do. The first question,
my dad's a rugby coach.
Yeah. From my perspective, the first question is never, oh, but what about playing with men? It's always more about the actual, like, how the sport works.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what would cause the most, if you're going to have a controversy about public acceptance, it's more going to be, the brooms and the bludgers and why is there 5 balls and what's going on. I think the mixed gender is the least of our worries.
I think you'd get more like, oh, that Harry Potter sport.
Yeah.
Like,
if we go in the Olympics, that would be the problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing that people would be messed up. They'd be like, are you sick? What?
Yeah.
Like, shall we just make J.K. Rowling a saint? Like,
just from my experience of telling people about Quidditch, it's never been the gender rule that's caused the issue. And so, I don't know if that's the same for you guys, but if you extend that to the wider public view, it should be relatively.
Yeah. Thinking about it now, this is a bit of a tangent. If you link it back to the books, in the books it's a mixed sport because the limitations are on what broom you can afford in terms of getting around the pitch. Like, and skill is not gendered. Like, there are perceptions of it which are, and I think they did a study where they looked at the fact that like in symphony orchestras it's like 30-something% female, but then if they did blind auditions it's like 50-50. And yeah, skill isn't gendered, so like maybe Quidditch is almost like obviously controversial because it's ridiculous, but nevertheless it's skill-based sport. So I think when you get to that kind of point, the moment you segregate it, you tier it.
Yeah, because then it would be like, oh no, we can't possibly sponsor the women. I'm sorry. There's not enough. That would do it.
Right. the American women's football team got less for winning the World Cup than the men did for getting knocked out in the group stages.
I will
And
never.
I'm just like, even I know that's bullshit. Like,
Like,
I don't even like football.
Sports
And-
funding goes to women's sports.
Like, this is a personal preference, but women's football is much better than men's. Right? Because there's none of this fucking dicking about on the floor every time someone brushes your elbow. Like, what the? Anyway, sorry, again, this is a tangent. But yeah, so like, but again, once they're put in separate categories, you can't put them together again.
Yeah,
So
that's
I would,
true. I think once you make
regardless of what was happening, I would always try and keep it like that, like knitted together.
I have a fun fact about, you know, when you said, the thing that people have a problem with isn't the gender, it's the brooms and stuff. I had a friend that I was mentioning, it was the summer, and I was like, oh yeah, we play Chefs vs. Skins. And she was like, oh, so did you, like, play separately? And I was like, no. Like, and she was like, so all the girls on the shirt side? And I was like, no, mate, no, there was stripping. And she was like, just in your bras? And it was like, well, yeah. Like,
sports bras really aren't that exciting looking. That's why
it's really slippery, and it's like, oh.
That's what I find so funny about it. I'm just kind of, it's this like underwear bikini thing, and you're like, sports bras are not like the most sensual of whatever accessories or whatever. It just
no, it's like, let's take a crop top and make it as unsexy as possible. That's just sports bra. And like, let's be real, like we're all on teams, people of many genders, and we share changing rooms. We go to the beach, we get changed on coaches. No one cares. Like
Highlander 1, when I was heavily concussed and in the shower, I have no fucking clue what I saw. Sat on the floor.
No one has any secrets.
Dougal landed on my head. Yeah, Oxford and Bangor had an adjacent shower thing, and I was in there for a while, but fairly oblivious. They lost me as well. My team lost me in the youth hostel. For like an hour.
Okay, so if we just
Sorry,
back a little bit.
Yeah, whatever.
No, that's fine. I was doing it too. But there's something genuinely quite interesting that I've heard discussed that I would like your thoughts on. So, I've heard some male players being very sad because it's just really tragic that refs are really hard on them. And I think this genuinely is quite a lucrative point of discussion. So, the kind of the exemplar is the incident with a farmer, I believe it was Northern. Refs being harsher on male players for sort of excessive force or particularly violent-looking tackles, even if they're completely legal. Some people make an argument that they would be penalised more harshly. Where do you stand on that?
Sorry.
No, you go. It's fine.
I was going to say, I think the same perceptions which put men on a higher physical tier also put them in a more aggressive stance. And arguably, if you look at the awful state of the entire world, that's true.
Sorry, go
on. Yeah, it is. And I think, arguably, a female body player who maybe even plays dangerously but physically is held in high regard. They're discussed about this time they did this and it was amazing and this guy broke a rib, and like that's put on a pedestal because it breaks the norm. But if a guy is being overly physical, especially because refereeing is getting pretty much exponential curve and improvement, that is becoming a factor where you want to be aware of excessive force. That does then feed into, are you limiting the use of force? Like you saying, Farmer, who is extremely strong, or anyone like Ash is probably the fittest player in the UK. Don't tell him. Oh, it's a live stream, isn't it? I mean, who's Ash Cooper again? No. But yeah, if they did a similar tackle and caused someone injury, even if again perfectly legal tackle, perfectly exactly the same situation, and it broke a rib or whatever it was, like they were being reckless with their strength, while the same player with a comparable level of strength was kind of, I don't know, breaking the mold. That got rambly again, didn't it? Sorry.
No, I get what you mean. It's interesting. I really agree with what you mean about how female aggression is very much valued and encouraged as something that, yeah, is exceptional and should be more, whereas, you know, we have Andrew on our team who it's really hard to convince him to run and squash people. He doesn't like doing it. He doesn't want to do it. Doesn't like hurting people regardless of their gender, but is especially aware of girls. And I think that just so much stems from the way that girls aren't encouraged to do contact sports. And because you don't have mixed gender things, that guys also almost aren't aware of how much a girl can take, and because society is reinforced that we are fragile and delicate, and okay, it makes me really annoyed at myself that whenever anyone hits me, I let out this involuntary girlish squeal, and I'm like, I'm cool, I'm fine, I stand up again, but I can't help it. It's just I scream, it sounds girly. It's unfortunate, but so much of that ties into it because we played some friendlies with Warwick the other week. And James hit me, and I let out my girlish squeal. And before I'd kind of knew what was happening, he'd been yellow carded. And we sort of said afterwards, like, don't think you lowered your shoulder. Don't think it was excessive. You just hit me, and I was off balance, and I fell over and went, whoa! And then you were carded. So it's unfortunate. And I think the controversy over it is that, again, it's one of those rules that could be exploitable, if you know what I mean. Like if I did, it is an involuntary squeal, but I could let out a louder scream on purpose, and would somebody be like, oh, you're exploiting the excessive force rule? And I do feel sorry for larger guys who almost have to be extra aware of that when it's not necessarily something excessive.
It's a difficult dynamic to get as a male-bodied player, where you have to use as much force as you physically can muster to take down any large player, to then the minutiae. My first red card was a high tackle on Hannah from Kiel, and her head is there. And it wasn't excessive force at all, but it was very slow. But even doing it as carefully as I could, it's impossible to. Well, not impossible. It was a bad tackle, but do you know what I mean? You've got to get that balance right. And switching from one to the other, just the mindset of it is really tricky. And lots of, like you were saying about your player Andrew, would rather err on the side of caution than go in hell for leather and risk injuring someone. Again, another Will card story. My first ever competitive card wasn't for excessive force, but it was for a leaping tackle, which it wasn't. I genuinely fell over my own foot. Jackie, it was against Durham, and I landed on Beck's low. He later joined me approximately 20 seconds later in the card box. But I think if a female player, potentially in my situation, if it had been the other way around, if Bex had fallen into me, then the perception of it would have been, oh, obviously that was a mistake. But because I was 6'2", big guy, that it was perceived to be a more kind of aggressive act.
So I think, going back to the Farmer Livia thing, I think the problem with that is that it was very much about their size difference. And that's the problem, is that you have to, I think referees in general need to be careful. Are they discriminating? Well, not discriminating. If someone's massive and they put a full force tackle in to a tiny person, that's where the excessive force can be a bit well, it was excessive because it was on that size person. But it's easy to unconsciously be not do that and do it because they're a guy as opposed to because they're huge. There was very much a gender controversy over the Farmer Livia thing, but for me, having seen it, it was more just because he was huge and she's very sort of slight, and it was just, yeah, it was more excessive force because of that, but the whole gender thing came out of it, and it's a line that needs to be carefully drawn between the two.
Yeah, because I think some people make the argument that you're limiting the potential and limiting the almost usefulness of male players who are very large, because you're saying, oh no, you can only use 70% of your strength, whereas realistically, I don't think there are any women that would be penalised in that same way.
No.
So they can use all 100% of their strength, even if they're an equivalent threat. Like, look at my Gemma 3, I'd be like, I would not mess with her. And male players can only use 70% of their strength. So there is an argument that goes that you're limiting them and that you're disadvantaging them in that way. But I think it's really complex. Hence why we're having the discussion, because you can't. Where does one person's right to use as much force as they need and as they want, and someone else's right to safety, which I'm sure no one is trying to contradict, but someone else's right to feeling like they are not going to be mistreated just because they are smaller. And it's really complicated.
I guess it's judging how much force you need to take one player,
Yeah.
and that should be something that is like widely, everyone should have that skill. But just because more often than not the massive players are the men, they're the ones who more end up with the problem of, oh, I just barreled through this person who's half my size. And I think it is more about size difference than like gender, but it just happens to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They coincide, but they're not necessarily causative.
I think there's a degree of respect that you need to kind of have on pitch. The moment you step on pitch, with everyone, all other players, all the referees, everyone knows that there is a risk of injury. And if you play stupid, then you're not respecting the pitch. But also, if you play almost like you said your player did, Lucy, if you play reserved, like, it's almost patronizing. It's almost sexist in its own way, and I very much did the same thing when I started playing Quidditch, which was longer ago than I'd care to admit, that I would use vastly more force while tackling a male player than a female player. And arguably, that bias was independent of size. So I would maybe tackle a male player that's 5'4", the same, with far more aggression and force than a female player. I think as the time I spent within the community and seeing it as a sport rather than as a game, I think has changed my perception of it quite a lot. Like, everyone on that pitch is an athlete, and to go half-assed, to go 70%, like Abby was saying, is to disrespect them to a degree. Obviously, you don't want to injure them, but like I don't know, it's the difference between ability and strength, I think. Like, if you don't go in with all your ability and skill, because like a skillful tackle isn't necessarily forceful, obviously. Well, excessively forceful, obviously. Like, you can take down a large player perfectly by using very little of your own force. You can use their own weight and their own weaknesses against them. So I think there's a degree of that where you have to give it your all, out of respect for them as an athlete.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think about that kind of perception.
My only thing about the playing sort of reserved, sometimes you get players who don't put enough force in, and then that female player goes on to score, and then they get that negative reinforcement of like, oh, you were trying to be reserved then, so you can't let that happen. And I have real sympathy for the difficulty of being a large strong person.
I mean, it's really terrible. I don't know how I go.
Whereas, so to be like, oh, I was too gentle that time, but I don't want to risk being too gentle, so this time I'm not squash, and I am standing at the sidelines shouting, and it's like, I do have a lot of sympathy for that difficulty in that. But you're right, there's kind of the respect is such a big part of it, because I would be pissed. It pisses me off when I do MMA, if somebody didn't actually try, then I would just be like, I'll just hit you in the face and we'll be done.
Yeah. And it's the fact that, like, Abby and I played each other yesterday, And there's no way in hell I wasn't marking Abby Whiteley. I don't care what gender they are. Like, I know their ability and their skill and their like competency as a player. If they get the ball, they're on the floor. I don't like whatever. And no, you're going like.
But the thing is that I think you were saying about this like expectation and girls being the exception when they do something good is that with the girls, you know that Abby can do that, so you will make sure. Whereas almost that female players have to prove that they can do the thing before they're seen as a threat. Whereas male players, if you just have like, which am I going to mark, the female or the male, people assume the male, and that's the bit where I get angry.
No, and that's completely justified. And if you'd asked me that question 4 years ago before I started playing Quidditch, then I would definitely have been the villain in this story. It's true, like these things are societal. They're not like people aren't the big bad wolf. It's what is ingrained. Fairy tales from the word go. Like, and yeah, Abby has a reputation as a player, but like that's what I mean from the respect perspective. That if you step on that pitch, you're a threat. Whether you're in a black headband, a green headband, a white headband, whatever. Like. And I'm going to take you seriously as an athlete. And like, I think that might be where some of this kind of fresher attitude might be quite a good phrase for it, where people haven't been in the community for very long, and they've not been exposed to Gemma Thrip. Is a good like. I went through a whole tournament without being tackled once, apart from Gemma Thrip, who threw me like a small child across the fucking pitch. And again, that was like you saying mixed martial arts. Like it was definitely just saw my momentum as an asset to her, and was just like, yep, that guy is, yeah. And like it wasn't that I took Gemma unseriously when I went in for that contact. But I hadn't assumed she would do that. Again, that's a particularly exceptional player.
She must be so bored of being used as an example.
I mean, pretty much. I may have also. I got a message from Sophie saying that she's glad the chin didn't get forgotten. But I think, yeah, it comes from once you know that every player on that pitch, everyone who's got boots on, can get a goal or a beat or a snitch. Like it changes your perception of, but more than Quidditch, actually, I think it kind of filters out into the wider world.
Excellent. Okay, does anyone have any closing thoughts? I won't want to cut you off in your prime. Everyone's just making faces. Okay, on that beautiful gurn, I think we can close it there. Thank you very much for all of your thoughts. It was really interesting and very valuable. And I don't know how to conclude this now, so I'm going to say good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us. It was fun. That was a part.
Yeah, it was banned. Good. Okay, see you all at BQC.
Ooh, yes.